Do you feel proud at the moment to live on Turf Island?
I absolutely do. I cannot tell you how proud I feel in so many respects. I mean, I feel vindicated. I still haven't actually come down off cloud 9, frankly.
Am I so out of touch?
There is no evidence that it buys time to thinking that the vast majority of those who go on to puberty blockers do then go on to masculinizing and feminizing hormones.
Wrong!
But one of the downsides of this focus on puberty blockers, which have become almost totemic for being the way to get onto a treatment pathway, is it stopped us looking at other ways of managing young people's distress during that time when they're working out what the right pathway is for them. And so we haven't looked at known evidence-based treatments for anxiety and depression, such as psychological support or even, medications for anxiety and depression that may be just as effective, or more effective than puberty blockers.
That's not how the science works.
The gender-affirming care, and to have this concept that there's no such thing as male and female, that you can take a biological male and convert them to a woman and they're
Through
really a
plastic
woman.
surgery.
I mean, that is, when you talk about witchcraft and voodoo, that is witchcraft and voodoo.
If I say I am female, then I am female.
Women are protected by their biological sex.
No, it's the
Science.
No, we're wrong.
Affirmation means if a girl comes along and says, I can't stand being a girl, I need to be a boy, you affirm that and agree. That's a totally inappropriate clinical stand.
So out of touch?
Wrong! That's not how the science works.
Everybody who was on the wrong side has to sheepishly head over to the right side. They'll pretend they were never on the wrong side. Hello, welcome to Team Turf.
Welcome to Team Turf, welcome to Team Sanity, Team Reality.
Transphobes love to say to their ideological opponents that they have science on their side. Denying trans people exist? That's basic biology, in their words. The point, however, should be taken literally. It's basic biology. Advanced biology has a very different view of sex and gender than that of J.K. Rowling, or Wes Streeting, or God forbid, Graham Linehan.
Yeah, well, Helen called me cruel. I phoned her afterwards and I ranted on a message, which I hopefully won't turn up in the future.
Their understanding of sex and gender is when a man and a woman love each other very much, they buy a mouldy castle together and learn to resent each other. And the scientific community, frankly, has a much better understanding of human development than even the most educational episode Sesame Street has to offer. With apologies to Keir Starmer and J.K. Rowling both, though God knows they don't deserve it, you can't get a good grasp on the science of sex, gender, or trans people from Elmo's world. No matter how many times you watch it, or how well you know the song.
That's what Elmo is wondering about today.
Decapitate TERFs.
Unfortunately for the rest of us, however, neither the media, nor politicians, nor beloved comedians and authors care about what science says unless it validates their preconceived biases. Hence, when the Cass review came out last year, conversion therapy, medicine bans, and unethical experiments that just happened to open the door for politicians to wage total war on trans people, particularly trans kids, politicians, mainstream media, and the transphobe Illuminati, pictured here sitting around J.K. Rowling like the Last Supper but for postmenopausal bigots, were delighted to be able to point to a document ordered by the transphobic British government, its investigators handpicked by the transphobic British government, and interpreted by the transphobic British government, to insist that, see? Look at this report, it's completely independent. Science is on our side. This is a review of the science, the official science. Don't look at all that other stuff going on over there. This is the science. And it just happens to agree with everything we think. Almost as if Hilary Cass of the eponymous Cass Review has a long history of transphobia and links to transphobic hate groups. And in fact links to long disproved studies in the review and recommends unethical experiments on children, purely to avoid the conclusion reached by the entirety of the medical profession that it is in fact not abuse to allow children access to puberty blockers, medicines that long ago were established as safe and effective.
That's not how the science works.
For more on the substance of the Cass Review itself, you can check out my video about it that I'll link in the description. But for now, let's just say it was not received well by the medical community. Look at that happy and very real child that agreed to be photographed for a document recommending all trans people under 25 walk into the ocean or live a life of unending horror. They're definitely real. I mean, sorry, she/he, because this report obviously proves no trans people exist. But these kids are definitely real. Just look at those hands.
If I say I am female, then I am female.
Which shouldn't be surprising, given that trans medicine is not at all Hilary Cass's speciality, and she threw out most of the actual data on it for incredibly dubious reasons. But if she were to do that, then she'd have to... I don't know, she'd have to really fudge the numbers. She'd have to discard the vast majority of evidence showing how stunningly effective trans healthcare is, with some bullshit excuse like, say, I don't know, that those papers were double-blind studies, despite double-blind tests for hormone treatments being... Hold on, let me just check my notes. Highly unethical and recognised bad practice.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the science. No, we're wrong.
In fact, it had not passed peer review. And based on what we could see by just, looking at the damn thing, and how at odds it was with all other research done on trans medicine before and since, it would not, in fact, pass peer review. Nevertheless, the Cass Review's existence was proof enough for our nominally left-wing party to use it as an excuse to make the Tories' puberty blocker ban permanent, with deadly consequences. And to kick off a second review, this time into adult gender services. I will be very surprised if this coming review does not also lead to trans medicine bans, because the entire country of Britain is falling apart, and since no one in power wants to do anything to even remotely start to address the reasons why, it's flailing around attacking any minority it can in the hope that the blood of the innocent will sate enough voters to allow them to keep cutting public services for another 5 years without a violent revolution. And when Keir Starmer isn't ordering the government to draw up literal league tables of migrant crime, something that would have been called extremely unrealistic and on the nose in even the most absurd parodies of the British government only a year ago, they're banning trans people from using any public bathrooms or gendered spaces, presumably in some sort of jobs program to create a legion of toilet cops.
Lesbian-only spaces.
Gender police, gender police.
Lesbian-only spaces.
Gender police, gender police.
And they're producing a report due this year that, if the Cass Review is anything to go by, will open up a new circle of hell directly underneath the UK just for trans people. Although, to be fair, Tartarus is only marginally less depressing than Stoke-on-Trent. Since the release of the Cass Review in April 2024, however, the critiques of the Cass Review have rolled in, from peer review to other reviews set up by governments outside the UK. So, if the Cass Review can stand up to scrutiny, then it should hold up against peer review, especially if it's being used to enact such drastic measures in the UK. That's the reason, in fact, other governments are looking at it. Should we implement that stuff here, they ask, and then they look and they see, no! In fact, the British government was so happy with the Cass Review, they reshaped a bunch of policies around trans people to make life crueler and harder for us, and made Hilary Cass an unelected legislator for life. That's right. Goodbye, trans rights. Hello, Baroness Cass. So, I'm assuming that the peer review process was positive for the Cass Review, right? Given all of this. Well, fasten your seatbelts, because if you're a fan of the Cass Review, despite everything I've said already, you might be in for a bit of a shock. Get comfortable, put the kettle on, and sit down with me, Bridget Empire, science and culture correspondent for accredited scientific journal, The Daily Telegraph. We may be a fictional tabloid newspaper filled with zombies and demons, but we're still somehow less evil than Elsevier. That's a joke for the academics in the audience. You're welcome, nerds. So for those of you who need a refresher on the basics of the scientific method, peer review is, in simple terms, the process in which experts with relevant knowledge and experience critically evaluate the research of a peer, essentially attempting to tear their contemporaries' work to shreds, to find any and all flaws in order to make sure a study is as rigorous and free of error as is possible. This process is designed to catch out shoddy research, plagiarism, botched conclusions, and all manner of issues that can be spotted with the eyes of hypercritical experts on it. Now, this system is not at all perfect, far from it, and a lot of bad studies slip through the cracks. But the initial round of peer review, which is what we usually think about when we're thinking about this, the one that takes place within the journals itself before publication, that's the beginning of the process, not the end. Peer review continues after publication. And even once studies get through the initial round of review, they are open to review articles, written critique, and if they're particularly egregious, even retraction and disavowal from their journals. The Cass review was not at all peer-reviewed. It was a shoddy collage of half-arsed excuses to do cruel things to trans children, excluding the majority of studies on puberty blockers for bullshit reasons, accepting discredited reviews with no justification, and basically stamping on the name of science in order to produce a purely ideological anti-trans hit job to give the government a free pass to beat us all to death with hammers in the name of harm reduction.
For the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
This is not, however, the definition of peer review you'd hear from transphobes, who are always happy to twist reality in whichever way they need to make it look like it aligns with their previously held and probably vile beliefs. Take the extremely wrong definition of peer review given by famous scientist Jules Kilojoules Rowling in an attempt to deflect from the extremely valid criticisms that the Cass review was not actually peer-reviewed. The Cass review is itself peer review! An experienced, unbiased, highly qualified specialist reviewed the evidence for transitioning children and concluded that experimental treatments have been given without a solid evidence base. Here's a crazy idea! Why not read it? According to J.K. Rowling then, peer review is when a peer reviews things. Wow. But with such an inquiring mind, no wonder every book she's written since Harry Potter has been absolute dog shit. Luckily for us, however, J.K. Rowling is not right about what peer review is. But if we want to take her definition seriously, which we shouldn't, but if we did, in the years since the Cass review's publication, some peers, okay, come on Joanne, have reviewed the thing. So let's take a look at what those peers had to say. Spoiler alert, the Cass review, according to everyone who's not Jules Kilojoules Rowling, is bad. Very bad. Quite bad. Officially. Scientifically even. Don't tell J.K. Rowling though. She's one bad day from the mole in her office overtaking her completely. And I don't know if there's a blade of grass big enough in the country for her to climb before she becomes the most transphobic fungal fruiting body in history.
That's how the science works.
Let's start with the article I touched on last time I talked about this subject. The article, Biological and Psychosocial Evidence in the Cass Review, a Critical Commentary, for the International Journal of Transgender Health, which, rather than recommending all trans people be thrown into the wood chipper and Hillary Cass become an unelected politician for life, as was the British government's reaction to the review, says, among other things, the review shows a number of issues that together point to a substandard level of scientific rigour. As such, it called into question whether the review provides sufficient evidence to substantiate its recommendations to deviate from the international standard of care for trans children. The authors conclude there is a twofold to threefold increase in the number of referrals to specialist paediatric gender/endocrinology services over time across countries. However, it is unclear what time frame this refers to specifically, and if this is based on the data corrected for population size, nor what the confidence interval is for the cited numbers. The conclusions on co-occurrence between ASC, autism spectrum condition, and gender dysphoria are unreliable. Neither study cited supports the claim made in the Cass report that more than 3/4 were referred for psychiatric issues other than gender dysphoria, or the majority of these were severe and preceded gender dysphoria onset. The review fails to engage critically with the literature on this topic, for example, by failing to discuss some of the key publications. Overall, the review makes claims about trends in terms of demographics that are weakly substantiated. The Cass review provides insufficient evidence to claim that brain maturation should be a reason to prohibit or restrict gender care for children and adolescents, especially in the face of these far-reaching legal consequences for such a claim. A set of key points poses a possible link between increased availability of sexually explicit materials and gender dysphoria, based on an article by Nandrovsky. The argument in the Nandrovsky paper is not supported by the data, and as the only source, is not sufficient to suggest a link between and gender dysphoria.
What the fuck?
One of the central recommendations of the review is the discontinuation of puberty blockers as standard practice for trans children within the NHS. As this is in direct conflict with long-standing international standards of care, it would be expected this recommendation is supported by substantial question about its positive effects of puberty blockers, and/or overwhelming evidence of their adverse effects. Such evidence is not presented in the CAS review. Similarly, the review argues there is insufficient evidence of long-term positive effects of hormone treatment in adolescents, recommending against early treatments, again directly contradicting international standards and the large number of studies used to develop these standards. So that's a pretty scathing critique, and this was just the first one I heard. It's been a year since this one. This is just the level we were dealing with as of June 2024. Almost a year on, we've had time to let other people go through the review. Much more groups, more states, more universities, more research centres. They've had time to poke the CAS review and, find holes. I'll have to be honest, Baroness Cass. It isn't looking good. For the integrity of your review, you'll be fine. You're a politician for life now, despite lacking any experience whatsoever. So enjoy your reward for ushering in a rollback in trans rights, the likes of which we haven't seen since Weimar Germany gave way to... well, we all know what it gave way to. And something tells me Baroness Cass wouldn't exactly be too horrified to see pink triangles making a comeback, based on how she twists the science that's so thoroughly settled on how trans healthcare leads to better outcomes for trans people, just so she can take it away from us and watch us suffer, all while she sits in the House of Lords and rakes in the money. This is strange though, no? I was promised by the cool and normal people in the British press that the CAS review was impregnable. People like completely gruntled and hinged columnist Sonia Soda, for example, took to The Guardian after the CAS review was originally published, writing the completely accurate and unassailable article, "Thanks to CAS, evidence, not ideology, will be used to guide children seeking gender advice." This headline alone was enough to prove what I've always known working for the Daily Telegraph. That every British newspaper columnist must, before they can write their first article as a professional slop deliverer, make a contract with a demon to only ever say the opposite of the truth. Science for these people is only science if it agrees with them. All science that disagrees with them, well, that can be ignored. That's not basic biology. Basic biology says that mummy and daddy have to stay together. Only the chosen baroness can determine what is science and what is not.
That's not how the science works.
In the time since that last critique was written, a lot more critiques have come out, all of them pretty scathing. That is a sign of bad science. You should have at least some on your side if there's even mixed quality to your work. Usually this stuff will get caught before it was published, but because the CAS review was a government review and not a scientific paper, it didn't need a review process before it was published. Ergo, it was allowed to come out with all of its problems unaddressed. Its many problems. And the government and the media ate it all up, because it was exactly what they wanted to hear and what they commissioned. But the scientific community got to work. It has no such interests. And the critiques have been piling in. The peer has been reviewed. Do you get it? The peer, because she's in the House of Lords? She's a peer? You guys are no fun.
If I say I am female, then I am female.
So, how did this peer review go? Well, McNamara et al. Wrote in an evidence-based critique of the CAS review on gender-affirming care for adolescent gender dysphoria. Unfortunately, the review repeatedly misuses data and violates its own evidentiary standards by resting many conclusions on speculation. Many of its statements and the conduct of York SRs reveal profound misunderstandings of the evidence base and the clinical issues at hand. The review also subverts widely accepted processes for development of clinical recommendations and repeats spurious, debunked claims about transgender identity and gender dysphoria. These errors conflict with well-established norms of clinical research and evidence-based healthcare. Further, these errors raise serious concerns about the scientific integrity of critical elements of the report's process and recommendations. Gavlik-Starzek et al. Wrote, "One of the overt criteria the NHS followed in choosing Hilary Cass was her complete lack of experience in working with people with gender incongruence and dysphoria. The common thread of many objections to the Cass report is the multifaceted downplaying of the importance of the voices of adolescents and their families. clinical practice, the scientific knowledge base, and national and global recommendations, while misleading the public that a complete lack of clinical experience in a given field is a guarantee of reliability. As a multidisciplinary team of experts and patients, we consider such a trend to be harmful and completely contrary to the interests of adolescents in need of help. Barbian Tornese wrote, "It is very unusual in the history of medicine that a time-honored treatment with a good safety record, even if based in non-randomized trials and experts' opinion, is simply banned while waiting for better evidence." Bellonci wrote, "Ultimately, our responsibility is to offer compassionate, evidence-informed treatment to patients so that they get to decide what is best for them, given what is known and unknown about the risks and benefits of an intervention. To do otherwise would be failing in our scientific mission to ensure that gender-affirming care is safe, effective, patient-centered, timely, efficient, and equitable, just as the Institutes of Medicine has called for." The World Professional Association for Transgender Health statement was, "Regardless of what Dr. Cass's intentions may or may not have been, the Cass review process itself intentionally and explicitly excluded any oversight from patients and their families and trans healthcare experts, and its content is not supported by robust methodology. The Cass review relies on selective and inconsistent use of evidence, and its recommendations often do not follow from the data presented in the systematic reviews. The Cass review deprives young trans and gender diverse people of the high quality care they deserve, and causes immense distress and harm to both young patients and their families." The European Professional Association for Transgender Health wrote, "While waiting for research results, not providing transgender adolescent care that may include puberty blockers and hormones to adolescents who experience gender incongruence is not a neutral act, given that it may have immediate as well as lifelong harmful effects for the young transgender person." That went from French to South African. I'm abandoning that accent. Also, asking transgender adolescents to participate in research as the only way to receive puberty blockers, as Cass recommends, is unethical. The British Medical Association wrote, "Members of the BMA's Council recently voted in favour of a motion, which asked the association to publicly critique the Cass review, after doctors and academics in several countries, including the UK, voiced concern about weaknesses in the methodologies used in the review, and problems arising by the implementation of some of the recommendations. The BMA has been critical of proposals to ban the prescribing of puberty blockers to children and young people with gender dysphoria, calling instead for more research to help form a solid evidence base for children's care, not just in gender dysphoria, but more widely in paediatric treatments." The Australian Professional Association for Trans Healthcare wrote, "The case review recommendations are at odds with the current evidence base, expert consensus in the majority of clinical guidelines around the world." Therapists Against Conversion Therapy and Transphobia wrote, "TACTT is deeply concerned by the final report of the Cass review, whose core underlying premise is effectively an eliminationist agenda dressed up in the language of reasonableness. We urge clinicians to treat the Cass findings with extreme caution and not to assume they represent best practice or that they have been arrived at after a full and impartial review of clinical data." The Endocrine Society wrote, "NHS England's recent report, the Cass review, does not contain any news research that would contradict the recommendations made in our clinical practice guideline on gender-affirming care. Although the scientific landscape has not changed significantly, misinformation about gender-affirming care is being politicized." The American Association of Pediatrics wrote, "The AAP's gender-affirming care policy, like all our standing guidance, is grounded in evidence and science. What we're seeing more and more is the politically infused public discourse is getting this wrong, and it's impacting the way that doctors care for their patients. Politicians have inserted themselves into the exam room, and this is dangerous for both physicians and for families." Davey and Hobbs wrote, "The fact that any new prescriptions of puberty-pausing medication for someone under 18 is now a criminal offence in the UK may be shocking, but to those of us who were observing the Cass review, it is not surprising. Dr. Cass was known by colleagues to oppose medical transition when she was appointed to the review, after all."
That's what Elmo is wondering about today.
Decapitate TERFs.
And those are just a small selection of a much larger body of critiques of the Cass review, many of which are collated by Dr. Ruth Pierce, whose blog post with all these critiques I will link below. But none of this is good for the prospects of the Cass review going down in history as anything but a hit piece commissioned by some of the most bloodthirsty excuses for politicians in modern British history. Of these articles, all are extremely critical, and some, I might well say most, point out the existential threat of this shoddy excuse for a scientific report to the trans people it is being used to police. And it should be noted that this policing has already resulted in fatalities. Fatalities that the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has been credibly accused of covering up.
Wes Streeting has boasted about how he's taken the NHS back under his direct political control, and since then, the NHS has accelerated its war against trans people. Yesterday, it issued guidance to GPs telling them they were not allowed to support trans people by providing them with blood tests. So we have the most hostile regime for trans healthcare, I think, anywhere in the Western world, including the United States. And the way in which trans people deal with this, as they will know, is that they get drugs from abroad, from regulated prescribers often abroad, and they ask their GPs to monitor their blood tests so they can take those drugs safely. And what NHS England has done is it's said to GPs, you are not allowed any longer to take blood tests for trans people. It's true of young trans people, and they're also indicating that they will soon make it true for older trans people as well. So the NHS, under Wes Streeting's control, is telling GPs to cause additional risk and additional harm to our trans friends and family and colleagues.
This is, and there's no way to say this without it sounding hyperbolic, evil. But what would you expect from the same government that promised change and yet treats the most vulnerable in our society, from immigrants to the disabled, with such wanton cruelty? And that's not even mention their horrific, bloodthirsty foreign policy, for which the government is now speaking out both sides of its mouth. Even our closest geographical neighbours are thoroughly rejecting the Cass Review. Ireland has been better than Britain on trans rights for well over a decade now, and the French Society of Paediatric Endocrinology and Diabetology in fact commissioned their own version of the Cass Review. But because they actually looked at the science, instead of rejecting our reality and substituting their own, as we did in Britain, their review reached the exact opposite conclusions as Cass, and in fact is in agreement with the scientific consensus on healthcare for trans youth. Almost as if Hilary Cass is extremely incompetent, wasn't fit for the job, and had no business being the one to make this review. She is, as the French would say, une piece de shit, in the words of Veronica Esposito for Assign Media. When considering the Cass Review within a larger context of treatment for trans youth worldwide, the document is an outlier. Many other bodies have reviewed essentially the same scientific evidence and reached the opposite conclusions. Earlier this year, Germany's Association of Scientific Medical Studies did its own review of the evidence, and again refuted Cass, to the chagrin of one anti-trans hate group. As a 2017 map from the European Union makes clear, affirmation of trans children is the rule throughout Europe, and disaffirmation is the exception. Although Norway and Sweden have limited such care since this map was created, it's still widely accessible there, with Finland as the only European nation we could find that has adopted UK-style restrictions since 2017. In banning puberty blockers for transgender children and restricting the use of hormones, the UK stands opposite the vast majority of Europe, as well as Australia, Canada, Japan, and elsewhere. The gender-affirming model of care did not come out of a vacuum. Other models more aligned with the Cass Review were tried in the decades prior, and they were found to be failures. This is why gender affirmation is still the predominant model. Ironically, the Cass Review calls for generating the exact evidence into gender-affirming care that already exists. The overarching conclusion from the evidence presented in this review is that the puberty blocker trial, which is already in development, needs to be one part of a much broader research program that seeks to build the evidence on all potential interventions, and to determine the most effective way of supporting these children and young people. Perhaps nowhere is a difference between the Cass Review and the SFEDP review more clear than here. Cass bemoans the lack of good evidence and recommends generating it, whereas the SFEDP declares that it is ready to follow the science by supporting minors in their transition. One cannot help but suspect that even if further research is conducted, in another 20 years another Cass will come along and demand another round of research into trans youth. D'accord. If the fucking French and the Germans are doing better than us, I think we owe it to ourselves as a nation to outwoke our continental European brethren. No one named Francois or Jürgen should be allowed to beat Britain on anything. Only a decade ago we were considered one of the most forward-thinking nations on the planet. Now every single one of our politicians is competing for who can be the most cruel to immigrants, Muslims, trans people, Palestinians and the disabled, and who can make the most poor people cry. Now, once the Front National and the AfD take over in France and Germany respectively, I'm sure they'll also do similar things. But come on man, we can be better than this. I mean, we're not better than this, but we could be. We have the ability to be, and we should start bloody trying. It's not like scientific critiques of the Cass Review are going to stop coming. It's a landmark document with massive consequences. And so far, every country is going over what we put out thinking, oh, maybe this has some worth, and going, wait a minute, what the fuck is this? Britain can produce fucking Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin and Alan Turing, and yet it's come to this? This is the level of scientific rigor we're bringing to the world stage? This review doesn't even hold enough water to wipe an arse with. Never mind strip a whole generation of kids from life-saving healthcare. This isn't going to get any better for Cass either. As well as being horrific for trans people, it's also doing massive damage to Britain's reputation on the world stage. Now, I don't give a single shit about our reputation, but I'm assuming that Keir Starmer and his merry band of flagshaggers do, so, you know, consider maybe not making us all look as useless and ignorant a nation as we factually are. We all know Britain's a shithole, but the world isn't supposed to know that. I want to be able to say, you know, this is my shithole. Alas, after the bathroom ban stuff you're forcing through, I presumably won't be able to use any shithole. So presumably, every trans person will have to squat over the White Cliffs of Dover, after which it, I presume, will have to be renamed the, Brown Cliffs. These things are just gonna keep coming. In fact, a new massive rebuttal of the Cass Review was published on May 10th this year, just yesterday at the time of writing, for BMC Medical Research Methodology, with a metric fuckton of authors, a long time in the works, and let me tell you, it's not positive. In the words of this study, from Noon et al., we have demonstrated that the Cass Report's application of EBM to GAC for children and young people is deeply flawed. Our critical analysis reveals significant methodological problems in the Commission's systematic reviews and primary research that undermine the validity of the Cass Report's recommendations. During our review of the report and supplementary primary research, we found insufficient statistical rigor, unreliable datasets, claims presented without evidence, and misrepresentation of quotes from primary research participants. These flaws highlight a potential double standard present throughout the review and its subsequent recommendations, where evidence for gender-affirming care is held to a higher standard than the evidence used to support many of the report's recommendations. Considering this, and the Cass Report's poor understanding of transgender identities and experiences, it is vital to question the integrity and validity of the review's recommendations and the appropriateness of basing health policy on them. This paper is especially important. It is a metric fuckton of authors. It's had a lot of time to go over the Cass Review in detail, a lot of time to cook, if you will. And the Cass Review is a long document that, to be most thorough, needed a longer time to go over. And this article's actually had to go through peer review itself to be published, and not just in the J.K. Rowling sense. The thing that the Cass Review should have had to go through and refused to, well, studies held to the actual standard are coming out now. And the verdict is very much in. It's what we thought. It's shit. Despite avoiding peer review and releasing the Cass Review, the scientific community has had their say for the past year, and they're not done. So far, it's been scathing. Peer review has destroyed the Cass Review. Multiple nations have come out to condemn its lack of scientific rigor and dangerous recommendations. It's time we did what peer review is made for. When you receive critiques, you take them on board and reassess. If the government cared at all about the scientific method or any sort of rigor, it would retract the Cass Review in its entirety and start over, taking all of these massive criticisms on board, before it brings them into disrepute. That's how science is done, particularly when a paper is this bad and coming under this much fire.
That's how the science works.
If I'd submitted a paper as full of holes as the Cass Review, it would have never been published. It would have been outright rejected by every journal. And not even a revise and resubmit as you sometimes get, but a full-on never come back to this journal with that bullshit again. The British government, however, has no such standards. As a state wielding tremendous power, If anything, its standards should be higher, much higher. Its words carry a lot of weight. And yet it chooses to spend these words spouting absolute nonsense. A body with actual integrity would retract and apologise for letting such an unscientific and dangerous document slip through the cracks, and recommission a review done by actually qualified scientists, subject to actual peer review before, not after, publication, and certainly not after its recommendations have been implemented. But because this is the British government, we'll never get that. The British government does not work on scientific journal rules. It works on Libby rules. Even when proven wrong on every single metric, don't back down. Double down.
Don't back down. Double down.
But two can play at that game. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are the rest of the community. These critiques aren't going to stop. Trans people aren't going to stop existing. We're not going to stop fucking protesting. We're not going to lie down and accept the continued attacks on our existence, so go ahead. Make yourself the laughing stock of the world.
This is fucking sick. It's no fucking right. You know what? Fucking send me there. Hurry up, cunt. Send me there right fucking now. Get out. Where's the door? Get me fucking out of here.
But no matter how much of a laughing stock you make yourself, we're not laughing. We're pissed. And we're not going anywhere. Long after the dust has cleared on this doom passing over the world, when the rise of the far right is over, and the world to come has long since made itself known, trans people will still be here. And the cast review will be nothing. A scrap of paper, only remembered by those it tried to stamp out, as one of the worst excuses for science ever put to paper. Until that day comes, thanks for watching.
Decapitate TERFs.
With science!
Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with all of your people, even people who don't like you. Send it to your enemies. Send it to your teachers, send it to your dads, send it to your mum, send it to your grandma, send it to your chum? I think I've already said that, I already said friends. If you have money, and if you know someone with money, I need it to get out of debt and to eat and things. So you can, if you have a few coins burning a hole in your pocket, or even if they're not burning a hole and they're just sitting there normally and you're not on fire, you can give me money to help. Thanks, advance. Coffee and PayPal, links below as always for one-time donations, or Patreon or YouTube memberships. You can do it regularly. And as well as all of the stuff I'm about to list, this is going the wrong direction, such as getting access to the members only Discord, mine and friend code, exclusive content such as long-form interviews with other people who've been on the show. You will get your name read out at the end of each video. Here are some of those people now. Lee Wilkins, George Geddes, Kira B, No Sparkling Heart, Corey, Matt J, Mighty than the Sword, Carolyn, Imogen Q, Luciana Frias Andrade, Adam, Harry, Ndog191, Kevin B, Madeline Aguirre, Ben Murphy, Lex Phoenix, Enter the Killers, It's Mirror D, Jade Senior, Boa Ea, James W, Marva and All, Thorin Gill, Bob the Builder, 5445554, Deborah Laboon, Vegish, Zilla Zathanium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Lissette, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Hilary L, Sierra Whiskey, Arestria, Ali Catgill, John N, Lord Vicente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Vader, Ron Podolsky, Turtle Chew, Casual Observer, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philippa Teproga, Soma Piglet, Brain, Dujarty, Wolf, Greg Noble, Diana Millen, Carolyn Regalado, Alexandra Lily, Howard Lott, Narani Xar, Jan, and Joey Coble. Thank you all. Cass. I was going to say she's over. She's not over. She's a baroness. She'll be there for life. Just sitting happy, having screwed us all over. But, well, everyone thinks the House of Lords should be abolished anyway. That matters. So, maybe one day she'll be abolished. I'd like to abolish her. That's not a threat. Legally, no lawyers listening, that's not a threat. I think the House of Lords should be abolished. That's a protected opinion. She's part of that. I think her position should be abolished, and she should be... Okay, the next part would have been a threat. I'm not going to say it. Okay, goodbye.
That's what Elmo is wondering about today?